Welcome. This is going to be a short review of Last Epoch, an action RPG developed by 11th Hour Games. As far as I'm aware, this was their first project, and of course, they are a smaller studio. I'm going to begin by discussing the visuals and graphics. I want to say that I like the art direction of the game. There's enough variety to keep you interested. However, the setting is more of a generic fantasy setting. And if you combine it with the graphical fidelity that requires a lot of work, you end up with a game that, yes, it's pleasant to look at, and nothing is necessarily striking out in a negative way, but nothing more. It was made by a smaller studio, of course. You cannot expect to be as good as games that have a higher budget, but still, it is worth mentioning. The music and the sound. Now, this is a tricky one. The tracks on their own, I would say, are above average. And there are a few memorable ones that you might want to listen even after you're done with the game. The problem here is not even the sound effects themselves, which are also satisfying. I'm talking about things like spells, attacking, weapons, striking targets. Where the game really hurts is the audio balance and the sound mixing. So the different elements are not balanced properly. If you boot the game for the first time, you will realize that the cutscenes are extremely loud compared to everything else. And these are not governed by the voice volume, but only by the master volume. Then there's the loud and obnoxious combat grunts and the shouting. These are very frequent, and they cannot be muted like the error sounds. This creates a situation where every 3 seconds you may have a very loud grunt. I never understood what exactly these offer to the gameplay. Maybe it's more of a personal preference, but they ended up being annoying very fast. Now, these are governed by the voice volume, which means that if you reduce it enough to the point where they're no longer annoying you, well, because they were so loud, you've made the majority of the dialogue and the voice acting inaudible. The music also has a similar issue, to the point where if you like the more atmospheric tracks and you increase the music volume, then the louder tracks, who are more intense and played during the boss fights, become almost deafening, because there's a very large discrepancy, unfortunately. And it's really a shame, because the overall experience does not do the game justice, or the composer justice. Let's move on to the story. Well, I'm not gonna say this lightly, but it is insultingly bad. I don't even understand what they were thinking with this. First glaring issue, the story is not finished. The game was in early access, but after the 1.0 release, you would expect that it's finished. Well, it is not. And what happens is that this is not some episodic game where you know that the story is not going to end, or that you finish the chapter and it's going to be to be continued with a black screen. Well, you play the story. After the 9th chapter, you defeat an enemy in a desert palace, and that's it. The story ends. You talk to a different character and says, well, the person you're looking for could be anywhere. You can look in the different timelines all you want, but the chance of finding them is essentially zero. And the game pushes you towards the monoliths, where you can explore the echoes of alternate timelines. Now, I understand that the developers want to introduce more chapters and finish the story. However, for a game that was in early access for so long and claims to have a 1.0 release, it's almost unacceptable to end like this. Now, The characters that you can play as are also somewhat boring. Nothing that they ever say is particularly interesting. The voice acting, yeah, serviceable, but not much else. They don't interact with the world in any interesting ways, other than the gameplay part. The only thing that is different is the character model, and that's about it. You cannot create custom characters. Not that this would be a great deal, but you would expect that when you play a pre-made character and there's only 5, they would have some flavor. They do not. Now, what about the lore, the world, the story in a more general setting? Well, as I said with the visuals, it's more of a generic fantasy setting. There is time travel involved, which usually makes things a lot more confusing, especially if the story is not specifically about time travel. Now, you have to also consider the fact that the ways your character interacts with the world is almost silly. The way the character enters the world and enters the story and agrees to do what they end up doing is never actually explained. You just happen to be upon some peace talks at the beginning of the game, and you simply go along with everything that happens somehow. The way that you talk to characters is also very poorly written. They make no sense most of the time. It's almost embarrassing to see this type of dialogue options. And of course, you can never really, let's say, interact with people in a way that leads to interesting scenarios. Every single quest and every single chapter can only be finished in a specific way. Even if you take a moderate interest in the world and the story, you will be disappointed if you wanted to explore a fantasy world and see what it has to offer. Yeah, this game is definitely not for you. I would, if I had to give it a rating from 0 to 10, it would be, I don't even know what they were thinking out of 10. Yes, it's that bad. Finally, the gameplay. Well, I'm happy to say that this is the best part about Last Epoch. And there's enough here to keep people interested for hundreds of hours. Now, the classes are unique when it comes down to their skill sets. Each class has 3 specializations, and you can invest into certain skills. There are interactions that offer a lot of options. You can automate the use of abilities. You can alter the way the scaling works and how exactly you itemize the different stats. Even crafting is very straightforward. A satisfying amount of deterministic options, which is always welcome. You're not completely at the mercy of the RNG. Obviously, there is RNG involved, but it's more deterministic than completely random. The combat overall, I would say, is responsive. The abilities have a good feel to them. When you use them, you understand the impact that they have. I don't really want to stress out about the gameplay. It's simply good if you are even moderately interested in action RPGs. This game has you covered. Another very important part of the Last Epoch, possibly what I would consider to be the best part about this game, is the efficiency at which the game conveys information to you. You do not need any external resources to understand what is going on, unlike other action RPGs that shall not be named. There is a game guide included. If you open the main menu, you can access it, and the majority of topics that you might want to research are essentially 1 or 2 minutes away from being understood. Lastly, I want to cover the end game. The end game has some attention for a game that just had a 1.0 release. I would say it's a satisfying amount of content, but obviously there's a lot of improvement to be made here. I do believe that the developers will develop even more content and add the patches. Hopefully they're gonna be good. The gameplay is not really the issue here. If you just want the gameplay, you should realistically purchase this game. The price is about $35 US or euros. You can, well, depending on where you live, that might be different. And the conclusion, which is for who is this game for in the end, I would say the action RPGs fans, they're gonna enjoy this game, but obviously this review isn't gonna mean much simply because they've probably already purchased that game. Maybe they've been playing it for years since it was in early access. What about everybody else? Well, unfortunately, I cannot recommend Last Epoch to pretty much anybody else for two reasons. Number one is that if you just want to look at a game and see a fantasy world, you want to see the story, you want to hear the music, you want to see what it has to offer visually, the overall experience is going to be definitely below average. If they fix the sound issues, maybe it's going to be a bit better. The story, I think, can't really be saved at this point. The writing is extraordinarily poor. I'm not gonna talk about the story anymore. And another issue about Last Epoch is that the game is still unfinished. For a 1.0 release, this is not something that I'm going to deem acceptable. And the point is that if you wait, you're gonna get a better deal. And not necessarily because of a sale, but because the developers are going to add content, they're going to improve the balance, they're going to fix issues. So my recommendation is wait for a couple of months or maybe for a year until the story is finished, if you insist to experience it and there are improvements overall added to the game. And if that never happens, hey, maybe there isn't really a reason to check it out. But that is it. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in another video.